Hello everyone, welcome to Tech Geeks tutorial. Today we are going to talk about integration test in Spring Boot applications. So there are multiple approaches that we can take for our integration tests. The best way to use some kind of in-memory database during our integration test phase. So we'll explain two different approaches for this. But first, let us quickly check the project structure. So I'll start with the entity. So this is a very simple entity that I created for the customer. It has two properties. One is customer ID, which is sequence generated, and the second one is the customer name, which is a string. Very simple. This is the repository, which is nothing but the JPA repository with all the default methods. The service has only one method, just to save the customer entity. Controller is just exposing that customer service to the external world. So with this very basic implementation of Safe Customer API, we have created this test case, and this test case is basically making a call to the Safe Customer API with this simple payload that the customer name is John, and what we are expecting is a customer ID which will come back as a response, and we'll check whether that is 1 or not, because this is a fresh sequence, so the sequence number will be only 1. So this is very basic and simple use case that we are going to try with. Now the first in-memory database strategy that we are taking here is using H2 database. Now for that, in our form.xml, only thing that we need to do, along with all the other dependencies, we'll only add this dependency of H2 database. What this will do, Spring Boot would automatically configure and load the H2 database and inject the data source into the Spring context automatically behind the scene. Now when we run our application integration test case, those data source and everything will be automatically available to you. We are having some test properties here, and this is just to facilitate our test. We are using the DDL auto as test and drop. So every time we are going to run this test, the table will be created and it will drop after the test. The SQL statements will be printed in the console. At the same time, the SQL statements are going to be printed in pretty format. With this simple configuration, if we go back to the test class and then run it, let me run this. So our intention is to load the H2 database and perform that particular Safe Customer API call, and then it should save into the database. Okay, so let's see what exactly it did. So it is now creating the sequence, it is creating the table as part of the initialization process, and then once that is done, it basically calls the insert SQL statement, saved the customer data, and finally the this is the response which will be coming back from the API, and so the assertions is performed successfully, and once everything is done, the table and sequence are dropped by the framework. This is a very simple use case using H2 database. Okay, so now the second approach that we are taking here is using a Docker container. Now as we are using or intending to use Postgres database, so we need a Postgres database Docker container to use it during our implementation test phase. Now when H2 database is not enough for our test cases, because let's say we are using some very specific Postgres or MySQL properties which are not available in H2, then this is a this is the database that we should be, or this is the approach that we should be using during our implementation test phase. So for this purpose, the configurations that we need to do here is, we are going to add couple of dependencies here. Okay, one dependency here, and as I said, we will be using Docker image. So behind the scene, this zone key framework, we are using this zone key test embedded database Spring test dependency. So behind this particular framework, they will use test containers to download a proper Postgres Docker image, and it will run during our integration test case, and then it will kill the Docker image appropriately. Now that's the dependency we're going to add. Let me refresh the form. Also, okay, let me remove the H2 database as well, just to be very sure that we're not using H2. At the same time, let's go to our properties file, and then we need to add this particular property called zone key test database Postgres Docker image. So that means we're going to use a Postgres image, and this is the image artifact. Version is 11 Alpine. Also, in the test class, we are going to add an annotation called auto configure embedded database, which will be coming from the zone key framework. These are the three changes that we have done. Now, if we run this test one more time, we just need to make sure that the Docker daemon is running in the box. So wherever we are going to run this, make sure the Docker is running. So what it will do, the zone key framework will now understand that there's a Docker image that needs to be pulled in. So it is now pulled the Docker image from the Docker hub. It's spinning up a Docker image, Docker container behind the scene with Postgres image in it, and then all the connection properties and the database data sources are automatically injected into the Spring context. And if you see the data logs now, you'll see the Docker the container image is this. It's all running. This is where the Postgres image is running and ready. And subsequently, all the operations that we have already seen in the H2 database use case, similarly same operations are going to be performed here, and then finally the response will be coming back as expected with the customer ID 1, and that way our integration test will be successful. So when this integration test will be running, the Docker container will be active, and when the tests are done, the Docker image will be automatically killed by the framework. So this is very cool and effective way to perform our integration test on real database here, as we are using Postgres database. This particular code base is already available in GitHub. I'll add the GitHub link into the description. Feel free to check that and modify accordingly if you want. That's it for today. If you have any questions or remarks, please let me know in the comment section. If you like the video, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much.